What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Derek and Cody, with you as always. Guys, we are going to talk about, through the first 2 weeks, what guys on the roster bubble we thought impressed us that might be able to increase their chances of making it on this roster. A couple different names here, a couple different positions. Most of these are actually from the defensive side, so very impressive indeed when it comes to a couple of these different names. And, Cody, we mention this guy's name every time we do a topic like this. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we have constantly been doing it. And I think it's only appropriate that we start with his name again, but this time for a better reason. And this time he is in it for the right reasons. That is Bannigoo, defensive end / outside linebacker. So we talked about it in the previous video that you and I did. The article came out from someone in the local media about Bannigoo taking responsibility for what has transpired over the last few years with him not getting much playing time, talking as well about how the new coaching changes have really opened not only his eyes, but a lot of different guys' eyes to be able to feel more at home and more at peace with themselves and feel more confident in their playing abilities. Well, so far, Bannigoo has really been showing that in a lot of different ways. He's been making some plays on the field and has been doing all the necessary things to present himself in a better light, staying after practice, doing more drills, things of that nature with some of these other guys. So from that perspective, I mean, you got to give credit where credit's due, right? That Bannigoo seems to be taking a little bit more of an initiative this offseason.
Yeah, I just wonder what happened. What took him so long for it to finally start to click? And again, you can't say anything because he hasn't seen the field. He hasn't even played in a preseason game, so that'll be a little bit more telling. And if he continues to do things the right way, maybe he gets a little bit more playing time. But right now, it's hard for me to say, oh my goodness, this guy's a lock to make the roster. But yeah, you're right. I think initially he's doing the right things. He's saying the right things. Seems like he's putting in some of the extra work that he needs to. Because Derek, we talked about it at the start of camp, before the start of camp, actually, that this is his last chance. Like, there are no more chances for Bannigoo. He very easily could be on the outside looking in when it comes to the 53-man roster cuts. And so we absolutely need for Bannigoo, or he needs, I guess, for his sake of staying on the roster, to have a strong camp, to put in the extra work, to say the right things, to do the right things, to take that accountability and really start to show that, he's worth consideration, I guess, for a roster spot. And it's crazy to say from a former second round pick that he may be on the outside looking in, but that's the reality of where he's at right now. So yeah, all that to say, I like what he's done so far, but time will tell. Talk is cheap, and he needs to put in the work and continue to do that and show that he deserves a real chance on this roster. There is an open spot. We've talked about it, that backup Leo position. Yannick Ngakoue is a starter, obviously, but behind him, it's wide open for a guy like Bannigoo, who, when you look at just his frame, his athletic gifts, it matches very well. But will he be the one that ascends into that potential backup Leo position for the Colts defensive line? We don't know yet.
Yep, absolutely. Only time's going to tell. Let's go into 2 more defensive linemen here. That is Eric Johnson, the draft pick that the Colts had this year, and Ifeadi Odenigbo, who is a player that the Colts had claimed off of free agency just a few weeks ago, actually. So relatively new player as well. But these 2 guys, different kind of resumes here. Odenigbo, more of a defensive end per se, but he also has had, some success in the NFL before getting here. We remember his days in Cleveland, even though they were short-lived. He definitely had a good season, a couple good seasons with them. And Eric Johnson, you and I were there Saturday. He did fantastic on some individual and one-on-one drills. So he's looking to potentially make his name known on the interior of that defensive line, where we've seen the question at depth. So, what are your thoughts on these two players and their likelihood of making the roster?
I feel like Odenigbo right now, if you're making me choose, the last couple defensive linemen, he's the first guy up there
Yeah.
because you talked about it, right? He has a little bit more of experience at the NFL level. Like he's played games, he's started games, he's been productive. Like he had a season a couple of years ago, I believe it was 2019, if I'm not mistaken, where he had 7 sacks. So this dude's proven that he can get to the quarterback when given an opportunity, and he's actually shined a couple times in camp. I believe there was one day where he had 2 sacks on the day, so I really think that he could potentially be a sleeper guy that could be a really, really solid rotational piece for this Colts defensive line, especially defensive end. Talking about Bannigoo, like I think if Bannigoo didn't make it, I think I would personally right now go for a guy like Odenigbo. I think I really would because he's proven it. Bannigoo has all the talent in the world, but Odenigbo has I can't even say it.
Odenigbo.
But Odenigbo has shown it a little bit more, right? He's shown a little bit more production at the NFL level, and I personally would take that over a guy who has potential to show that. So that's kind of my opinion on it. And as far as Eric Johnson goes, we all know that he was a little bit of a later round pick this year, but he's got some juice to him as well.
Yes.
Right. He has some things that he can offer, and I think he has a real chance to be a nice rotational guy behind Grover Stewart at that one tech. I really think he has a great opportunity, and I think he can kind of, play a little 3 tech too if needed. So overall, I think both those guys have really shown out. Ironically enough, the guy that we were super excited for, at least so far in camp, in Curtis Brooks, we haven't really heard anything about him, which has been quite interesting because I thought we'd hear a lot about him, but it's still early. We'll see.
Yep. It's going to be very difficult to have an Odenigbo and Odangbo. And it's going to be very hard if those two both make the roster. That is going to be very hard for not only us, but national media people to be able to remember that. Hopefully, everybody has their notes and clipboards ready because that is going to be a long season of that.
I say classic Chris Ballard. He makes all the names on the defensive line for some reason extremely hard to pronounce.
Makes them so hard, bro. It's like, gosh, can you pick a regular person's name? Like, where's Lawrence Taylor, right? Like for 2 first names, right? Just easy back to back. It is so easy.
Yeah. At least you have Pay back there, but you have Ngakoue, you have Odenigbo, you have Odangbo, you have Bannigoo, you had Toure. Like, there's all these ones you're just like, oh my word, what is the deal here?
It's very, very funny to say the least. Let's stick with the defense real quick. One more defensive player on this list, and that is Jojo Bowman, an undrafted free agent that the Colts acquired, who originally was projected to be a 4th, maybe even 5th round draft pick. It's kind of similar to what the Justin Ross situation that we remembered. Everyone was wondering, Ross was a projected 5th round draft pick, and sure enough, went undrafted. Obviously, is out now, but Jojo in this week didn't shine much in the first week of practices, right? But then when the pads started coming on, Jojo really started showing that aggressive nature and started putting his pads to use. And it was noticeable enough that the local media was mentioning his name several times throughout the week, making some great tackles in 11-on-11 drills. So I think there's a chance that Jojo rounds out the one of the last few spots with this linebacker unit.
I definitely think there's a chance. Jojo Bowman is a very, very underrated player, in my opinion. And he's big. Like, he's a bigger linebacker that you don't really think about, but he actually shows when the pads come on, he's ready to roll. And so I'm excited for him to hear that he's been, out of all the undrafted guys on the linebackers, there's a lot of them the Colts brought in. I think we're most excited for Jojo Bowman and what he could potentially do for this Colts defense. Now, obviously, I always raise this question. Can he play special teams? We shall see. But I think, as far as guys that have stood out, I think he's certainly helped his case for, potentially fighting for that final linebacker spot, depending how many the Colts do keep. But I certainly think he's put himself in that conversation, no question.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the offensive side of the ball now.
Okay.
And we've got somebody practically every position. Well, we got two guys at wide receiver. Let's kind of start there. So we have first Isaiah Ford, who the Colts acquired right before training camp, or actually, it might have been the day training camp started. So, right at the beginning of training camp, Isaiah Ford was brought in, spent a little bit of time with the Chargers, not really much to go off of throughout his first couple years in the league. But Isaiah Ford, definitely in the first week, made a very good impression, had a couple of really great catches. And then Michael Young Jr., Alec Pierce's teammate at UC, the undrafted free agent, maybe with potentially the catch of the entire training camp so far, with a spectacular one-handed faded diving catch on the sidelines in the one-on-one drills when you and I were there, was easily the best catch of the day when you and I were there for sure. It had the crowd going crazy. Uh, and Michael Young has made a couple of good plays here and there in the 7-on-7s and in the individuals. Really haven't seen his name come up, though, in 11-on-11s or anything like that. Do you think there's a good chance that either one of these guys could crack out the back end of this roster?
It is so hard to say right now because you literally have heard nothing about anybody outside of the top four. Like, I feel like you've very rarely heard about any of these guys. Some of these guys make a couple catches, but nobody's been consistently better than another player. And so that's kind of just makes it tough right now. And again, I say this a lot, and sorry if it's a little redundant, but like preseason will tell a lot. It will tell a lot about who is actually going to, take advantage against somebody besides this Colts defense, So I think Isaiah Ford is probably the more likely one right now, just because he has a little bit of experience in the league. But certainly these guys have not done nothing but help their case for potentially vying for a roster spot. I wanted to talk about one more guy, speaking of spectacular catches that we didn't talk about, and that's Andrew Ogletree. We have to talk about him because, he is right now potentially going to make the roster at that tight end 4, and honestly has started the conversation, Derek, about should the Colts keep 4 tight ends. Yeah. We thought, they'll probably just keep 3 and Ogletree will be a practice squad guy. Not so. He has been fantastic the last couple of days of camp they had. He's made some highlight one-handed catches. I mean, he's all a 6'5", Derek. He's big. He's a big guy. The Colts initially didn't draft him really to be much of a receiver, but he's shown a little bit in terms of getting, down the field and making some contested catches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his skill set really has evolved very well. I mean, you knew from the highlights, the few highlights that you were able to see, that this guy definitely had flashes of talent to show that. And, like you said, and especially this last week with the pads going back on, has made some great plays. And that's the kind of thing that sticks out. And if you do it multiple times, then it's going to help you prove your case. And you're right. It is starting to make people question if the Colts end up keeping 4 tight ends on this roster. I mean, the amount of different things, the different looks you could give with these bunch of these different guys, definitely. It's nice also to know you have 4 tight ends that you trust to go out there and make a play for you, whether that be blocking or receiving, and not feeling like you have to stretch it. So it's great that that Ogletree is basically making that kind of assertion on himself and is being able to make these plays and put him in that mix.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the running backs. Really, there's only been about 2 names, especially this last week, that have really come to mind when you've seen the 11-on-11s, and that's Phillip Lindsay. But the other one that we're talking about is CJ Verdell, out of the undrafted free agent out of Oregon. CJ really had a couple of good practices with Indy, stepping in those spotlights, had a couple of good runs, especially on, I think it was the first practice of the week for them, which was Tuesday.
Full pads, yeah.
Yeah, and he had a couple really good runs in place of a couple other guys. So, we talked about it in the other video. This running back room is so full right now of guys looking to try to round out this last spot. So, I mean, what are the odds for CJ Verdell?
I think they're pretty good, honestly. And I think one thing I didn't talk about in the last video that I want to talk about here is I always said, like, whenever the pads come on, we'll see a lot. And I think we start seeing the more physical runners, to kind of take the dominance, kind of start taking control of those positions. And I feel like that's kind of what we've seen. Verdell has taken one of those, and I think Philip Lindsay as well. Both those guys have, I think a lot of potential in that, and kind of, they haven't completely, I don't think, because I think there still are a lot of talent, like we've talked about in this room. But I think for right now, like, they've started to kind of solidify themselves a little bit more as, like, these are the two guys worth watching right now in training camp. Now, obviously, that's subject to change, like I said in the last video, but the pads, I think, revealed something about who are the real dogs in this running back room. And I think we've seen it so far, at least this week. It's starting at least to look like Philip Lindsay and CJ Verdell, at least to start, are those two guys. So I think the Colts potentially will keep 4 guys. We'll see exactly how that rounds out, but it feels like that's something they've done before, and it would make a lot of sense, especially considering, outside of Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines can play a little bit of both, right? He can play some wide receiver and he can play some running back for you. So, it'd be nice to have 2 other guys, a little bit of insurance, more of the vet and more of the undrafted rookie. It'd be nice to kind of have that comp there, but both guys offer different skill sets as well. So all that to say, yeah, I think those 2 guys in particular have started to really kind of, solidify themselves as more of the guys that I think, if you're making me choose right now, Derek, I'm saying these 2 guys are your number 3 and number 4.
Absolutely. All right, last guy that we can mention here, and that is Jason Spriggs, the former IU product that everybody remembers. There was I think there was a time when Kelly was out of practice. I think it was Wednesday for a few snaps. Pinter went in at center, and Spriggs got moved to right guard. So that was their backup plan at that moment in time. So it begs the question, and you and I talked about it right before training camp when they signed Spriggs, and we're looking at this interior offensive line depth. We thought the Colts have just gone bananas on the tackle depth, right? But we haven't really talked a lot about the interior offensive line depth. There's not a lot behind Pinter and Nelson right now. And it begs the question, is Spriggs going to be able to find some way to make this roster? And based off of what happened this week at camp, Spriggs got a few reps with the one. So is that the possibility that's what's going to be the backup plan for them?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Spriggs is, like you said, he's had experience in this league. As much as we like Will Fries and we feel like he stepped in well last year, it is nice to have some vet experience in there. It is nice to have a guy that has started some games in the NFL and has really, like, proven that he can be a competent offensive lineman. So, no, I'm not surprised at all that the Colts chose to go a little bit more veteran route as opposed to a young player like Will Fries, who I still think will make the roster. But I think it starts a more interesting conversation of, like, maybe we thought, like, we were all kind of losing our minds when the Colts let Glow and Chris Reed go. But maybe the Colts had a contingency where they're like, look, we'll find a guy that we can plug in there that'll play good ball for us in a bench, And it seems like so far Spriggs is kind of being that vet guy. That seems like Colts find a vet guy about every other offseason that can really step in and perform well for him. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm surprised by this at all. We talked about that right at the beginning of the camp. Like, could he play, right, some interior offensive linemen? And it seems like so far the Colts are giving him a shot, and it looks like he's held his own so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought Fries was going to be primarily that backup left guard, because we saw him come in at times at the left guard position when Nelson went down, and then when we had some other guys go down as well. So, I thought that, that right guard spot, if Pinter had to move in at center, what was the Colts backup plan for that? You were either going to go Will Fries, Jason Spriggs, or Brandon Kemp. And right now, Kemp doesn't have a lot of experience. And Will Fries, you would prefer to have at that left guard spot if you can help it, because he's your best backup interior guard at this moment. And then Spriggs could throw his name in there if he does enough. And it looks like the Colts have definitely found a way to utilize him. Hopefully he does end up cracking this roster, because I always said it, he does have experience in the league and is a active guy with his feet. So that's exactly how the Colts like to use their guards. So
and that was kind of a question we all had, right? You talked about it. Like, that was one of my like, okay, that would be kind of scary, if something did happen to Kelly, because, last year you felt fine about it because, you had, okay, Danny Pencher will step in and it'll be fine, or, if whatever happens, right guard, you don't have a question because you have two other quality guys there at right guard. And that's not so this year. You have Danny Pencher starting at right guard, so your depth would be a little bit more tested. So if you can get a Jason Spriggs in there and he can get used to that position and just be used to being that backup guy, that makes you sleep a lot better at night, knowing that your offensive line depth is a little bit less in question.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Those are some of the players on the roster bubble that we think impressed us enough. They might actually make this roster come when it's time to cut it down to 53. Let us know your thoughts. Is there any other people that you thought impressed you that you think is going to end up making this roster? Do you agree with the picks that we had? Do you not agree with some of them? Let us know your thoughts. Again, guys, thank you so much for the continued support. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, guys, go Colts.